The classic croon of Bing Crosby singing White Christmas drifted from the warm living room. But the moment Clara opened the front door, a chill struck her heart that had nothing to do with the blizzard outside. She stood in the grand entryway of the Greenwich estate, shaking the heavy snow from her modest wool coat. Her boots left small puddles on the pristine marble floor, a stark contrast to the perfection surrounding her. The house smelled of fresh pine needles and cinnamon sticks, the scent of a holiday she had spent weeks preparing for. Clara placed a protective hand over her 8-month pregnant belly, feeling the baby kick as if sensing her sudden tension. In her coat pocket, her fingers brushed against a small, velvet box. Inside was a vintage watch she had spent months saving for, engraved with the words, "To Richard, time is forever, and so are we." She had imagined his smile when he opened it, a moment of connection after months of his growing distance. But as she walked into the living room, the smile she had practiced died on her lips. Richard was not waiting for her with open arms. He was sitting on the Italian leather sofa, dressed in a sharp tuxedo, holding a crystal glass of scotch. Next to him, lounging comfortably in Clara's own silk robe, was a woman Clara had never met. She was younger, with sleek blonde hair and a face full of perfectly applied makeup. They were laughing, a sound that felt like a slap in the quiet room. Richard looked up, his expression shifting instantly from amusement to annoyance. He didn't ask how her doctor's appointment went. He didn't offer to help with the grocery bags that slipped from her numb fingers and crashed to the floor. Instead, he sighed loud enough to be heard over the music. "You're early, Clara," he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "You're ruining the aesthetic." Clara couldn't find her voice. She looked from her husband to the stranger wearing her clothes. The woman took a sip of champagne and looked Clara up and down with a sneer that made Clara feel small, despite the life growing inside her. "Is this the charity case wife you mentioned, Richard?" the woman asked, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She turned to Richard, ignoring Clara's presence entirely. "She looks even more urban than I imagined." "Are you sure she's not the help?" The insult hung in the air, toxic and sharp. Clara stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Richard? Who is this? Why is she in my robe?" Richard stood up, smoothing his tuxedo jacket. He looked at Clara not with anger, but with a cold, calculated indifference that broke her heart more than any shout could have. "This is Sarah," he said simply. "And she fits the image of my new executive status. You, Clara, you don't." He walked over to the fireplace, turning his back on her tears. "I have important colleagues coming tonight. Investors. Partners. People who expect a certain caliber of family. Look at you, Clara. You're plain. You're tired. You don't belong in this world, and frankly, I'm tired of pretending you do." Clara gripped the velvet box in her pocket, so hard the edges dug into her palm. The watch, the engraving, the love. It all felt like a cruel joke now. "I am your wife," she whispered. "We're having a baby. A baby that will be an anchor around my neck," Richard countered coldly. "I've already spoken to the lawyers. You'll be compensated, provided you leave quietly." Sarah laughed softly from the couch, picking up a magazine as if bored by the drama. "Run along now," she said. "The adults have a party to host." Clara stood frozen, the warmth of the fireplace unable to reach the ice spreading through her veins. This wasn't just a breakup, it was an erasure. He was erasing her because she wasn't the right look for his new life. "Pack your trash and get out," Richard spat, turning his back on her. "My real guests are arriving in an hour, and I don't want an eyesore like you greeting them." If you are still watching and finding value in the story so far, please drop the number 3 in the comments below. I'd love to know you're here with us. And if you haven't already, I highly recommend you subscribe to the Black King channel and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss the justice that is coming for Clara. Your support helps us continue creating great content to inspire you every day. Now, let's continue. "You don't even belong in a neighborhood like Greenwich," Sarah laughed, her fingers curling around a pair of sharp kitchen scissors lying on the marble counter. The metallic glint of the blades caught the light of the crystal chandelier, sending a shiver of primal fear down Clara's spine. She instinctively raised a hand to her hair, her thick, natural curls that she had grown with such pride over the last 5 years. Richard used to tell her he loved its texture, calling it unique. Now, Watching the way Sarah looked at it with unmasked disgust, Clara realized his compliments had likely been lies all along. To them, her crown was nothing more than a symbol of the heritage they despised. "I'm going upstairs to get my things," Clara said, her voice shaking but resolved. She tried to step around the kitchen island, but Sarah moved with surprising speed, blocking the hallway. "That messy hair is an insult to this house," Sarah sneered, snapping the scissors open and closed. "It's so frizzy and wild. Before you go, let me fix it for you. Consider it a parting gift." Clara turned to Richard, pleading with her eyes. "Richard, please. Just let me get my suitcase." But the man she had vowed to love forever didn't step aside. Instead, he stepped forward. His heavy hands clamped down on Clara's shoulders, pinning her in place. "She's right, Clara," he whispered, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. "You always looked so unkempt. It embarrassed me at the club." "No." "Richard, stop." Clara screamed, struggling against his grip, terrified of hurting the baby if she fought too hard. Sarah stepped in close, a cruel smile playing on her red lips. She grabbed a handful of Clara's hair, pulling it tight until tears pricked Clara's eyes. Snip. The sound was sickeningly loud in the quiet house. A thick lock of dark curls fell to the polished floor. Snip. Snip. "There," Sarah laughed, tossing another chunk of hair onto Clara's coat. "Much better. Now you look like you know your place." Just then the doorbell chimed, a cheerful melodic sound that clashed horribly with the violence in the hallway. The front door opened, and the first wave of guests drifted in. They were Richard's new crowd, wealthy, elite, and exclusively white. They stopped, holding their wine bottles and gifts, staring at the scene, a pregnant woman weeping with chopped hair, held down by the host. But nobody dropped their wine. Nobody called for help. A woman in a fur coat leaned toward her husband and whispered loud enough for Clara to hear, "Well, he's definitely upgrading to someone with more class." Clara slumped as Richard finally released her. She felt stripped bare, her dignity lying in shreds on the floor with her hair. As she tried to steady herself, her eyes locked onto Sarah's neck. There, resting against the silk robe, was a ruby necklace. It wasn't just jewelry. It was the only heirloom Clara had left from her late mother, kept in the safe for special occasions. "That's my mother's," Clara choked out, falling to her knees. She reached out a trembling hand. "Please, keep the house. Keep the money. But please give me my mother's necklace." Sarah fingered the ruby possessively, looking at her reflection in the hallway mirror. "It looks too expensive for you," she said idly. "On me, it looks right. It stays." Clara looked up at Richard, begging one last time, not as a wife, but as a human being. Richard just laughed, a hollow sound devoid of any soul. He walked over to where her battered suitcase sat, kicked it hard so it skidded across the floor and tumbled out onto the snowy porch. "Take the hint, Clara," he said, checking his watch. "You're evicted." As the guests applauded her exit like it was a theater performance, Clara realized the man she loved wasn't just a cheater. He was a monster who hated her for the color of her skin. The heavy oak door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in Clara's bones, severing the warmth and leaving her alone in the biting darkness of the blizzard. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the howling wind that whipped through the grand pillars of the porch. Clara stood shivering, the cold instantly penetrating her thin wool coat, biting at the exposed skin where her hair had been hacked away. She took a shaky step down the icy stairs, her vision blurred by freezing tears. Her foot slipped on a patch of black ice, and she tumbled forward, landing hard on her hands and knees in the snow. Her suitcase, already damaged from Richard's kick, burst open upon impact. Her clothes, maternity sweaters, soft cotton leggings, baby socks she had knitted herself, scattered across the wet, muddy driveway like debris from a shipwreck. "No, no, please," Clara sobbed, frantically trying to gather the wet garments with numb fingers. The wind seemed to mock her, blowing a tiny pair of yellow booties out of her reach and into the darkness. "Oh, my dear. My poor dear," a voice called out from the gloom. Clara looked up to see Mrs. Higgins, the elderly neighbor from next door, rushing toward the fence. She was wearing a heavy robe and clutching a thick, colorful patchwork quilt against her chest. Mrs. Higgins had always been kind, often complimenting Clara's garden when the other neighbors turned up their noses. "Come here, child," Mrs. Higgins cried, leaning over the low iron fence, extending the handmade quilt. "You'll freeze to death out here. Come inside my house, quickly." Hope flickered in Clara's chest. She reached out for the blanket, desperate for any shred of warmth. But before her fingers could brush the fabric, the front door behind her flew open again. "Get back inside, Mrs. Higgins!" Richard roared from the warmth of the entryway, silhouetted by the golden light of the party. "I warned you about interfering. Unless you want me to report your unkempt lawn to the HO again and fine you into bankruptcy, you will mind your own business." Mrs. Higgins flinched as if struck. She looked from Richard's furious face to Clara's pleading eyes. Her hands trembled, clutching the quilt. She was a widow living on a pension. She couldn't afford a legal battle with a man like Richard. I'm so sorry," the old woman whispered, tears in her eyes. She retreated slowly, leaving the quilt draped over the fence, a symbol of kindness stifled by cruelty, and closed her door. Clara was truly alone. Suddenly, a sharp pain ripped through her abdomen, not the dull ache of sadness, but the tightening grip of a stress-induced contraction. She gasped, clutching her belly, doubling over in the snow. The cold was seeping into her marrow. She knew with terrifying clarity that if she stayed here, both she and her daughter would die before Christmas morning. Through the haze of pain, a memory surfaced. It was a voice, deep and unwavering, from 2 years ago. She remembered the day she left her family to marry Richard, thinking she needed to escape her powerful name to find true love. Her eldest brother, Marcus Harrison, had held her hands and said, "No matter how far you run, you are a Harrison. One call and we come." She hadn't spoken to them since. She had been too proud, too ashamed of her choice. But now, looking at the house that had rejected her, she realized pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. With trembling fingers that could barely feel the screen, Clara pulled out her phone. She dialed the number she had memorized in childhood. It rang once, twice, echoing in the empty, snowy street. The line connected, and a deep, powerful voice answered immediately. "Clara? Is that you?" She sobbed. "Brother, I need you." They took everything. If you are still watching and can feel the intensity of this moment, please comment the number 8 below to let me know you're here. Do you think help will arrive in time? If you haven't subscribed yet, I highly recommend you join the Black King family and hit that notification bell right now. You absolutely do not want to miss the justice coming in the next chapter. Your support helps us continue creating great content to inform and inspire you. Now, let's continue. The silence of the snowy street was shattered not by sleigh bells, but by the deep, guttural roar of 3 matte black Maybach engines that vibrated in Clara's chest. Clara looked up through her tears, her breath hitching in her throat. The heavy snowfall had calmed to a gentle drift, creating a pristine white stage for what was happening. 3 identical luxury sedans turned onto the quiet cul-de-sac, moving in perfect synchronization like a presidential motorcade. They didn't look like cars that belonged in a suburban driveway. They looked like tanks dressed in tuxedos. The vehicles glided to a halt, completely blocking Richard's driveway and trapping his guests' cars. The engines idled with a low, menacing hum that seemed to shake the frost off the nearby trees. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the rear doors opened in unison. Marcus, Thomas, and William Harrison stepped out onto the snow. They were a striking trio, taller and broader than Clara remembered. Dressed in bespoke Italian suits beneath heavy, dark cashmere coats, they radiated a kind of quiet, terrifying authority that Richard's new money friends could never buy. Sarah had called Clara dusty and urban just an hour ago, mocking her appearance. Now, standing against the backdrop of these million-dollar machines, Clara's family looked like royalty descending upon a peasant village. Marcus, the eldest, saw her first. His stoic face, usually unreadable in boardroom negotiations, cracked with raw emotion. He ignored the mud and slush that threatened his polished shoes and sprinted toward her. "Clara," he shouted, his voice cracking. He reached her in seconds, stripping off his heavy coat and wrapping it around her shivering frame. The warmth of the cashmere and the scent of his familiar cologne, cedar and sandalwood, instantly made Clara weep with relief. We're here, little sister. We've got you. You're safe now. The front door of the house banged open. Richard stumbled out onto the porch, a half-empty wine glass in his hand, his face flushed with alcohol and indignation. Sarah stood behind him, peering nervously over his shoulder. "Hey!" Richard yelled, slurring slightly. "Who do you think you are blocking my driveway? I'll call the police. Get those cars off my property." Thomas, the middle brother and a ruthless corporate lawyer, didn't even raise his voice. He adjusted his glasses and checked his watch, walking calmly toward the porch steps. "Your driveway," Thomas repeated, his tone dangerously level. "We'll see about that." Richard puffed out his chest, trying to look intimidating, but as William, the youngest, yet most physically imposing, joined his brothers, Richard's bravado faltered. The neighbors, including Mrs. Higgins, were watching from their windows, witnessing the shift in power. "You're Clara's brothers?" Richard stammered, realizing too late the magnitude of his mistake. "Look, this is a misunderstanding. She was just leaving. She's hysterical, you know how." "One more word," William growled, stepping onto the first step, "and I forget I'm a doctor who swore to do no harm." The brothers marched up the stairs, flanking Clara like a protective phalanx. Richard tried to block the doorway, but as the three Harrison men bore down on him, the sheer weight of their presence forced him to stumble backward into the foyer. They didn't touch him. They didn't have to. Richard shrank away like a child caught misbehaving. They swept past him, guiding Clara back into the warmth of the house she had been thrown out of. The chatter of the party died instantly. The music seemed to screech to a halt. Every wealthy guest froze, holding their hors d'oeuvres, staring at the three powerful black men dominating the room. Marcus stood in the center of the festive living room, silenced the music with a wave of his hand, and announced, "The party is over. Now we discuss the price of my sister's tears." "You called her the help," Thomas said calmly, placing a thick legal file on the coffee table next to the eggnog. "Funny, because according to this deed, you are living in her house." The room went deadly silent. Richard blinked, his face paling under the recessed lighting. "What are you talking about?" "I signed the papers. I pay the mortgage every month." Thomas, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses, opened the file with the precision of a surgeon. "You signed a lease agreement, Richard. You pay rent. The property was purchased 5 years ago by the Harrison Family Trust for Clara's future. We let you pretend it was yours because Clara wanted you to feel like a man. But technically, you are a tenant. And you just violated the morality clause of your lease." A gasp rippled through the guests. The whispers started immediately. "He doesn't even own the house?" Richard looked around wildly, his facade of the successful provider crumbling instantly. "No, that's impossible," he stammered. "Clara, tell them." Clara didn't speak. She was busy letting Marcus wipe a snowflake from her cheek. She looked at Richard not with anger, but with pity. William, who had been silent until now, stepped closer to Sarah. The mistress was trying to shrink into the sofa cushions, but there was nowhere to hide. William's eyes locked onto her neck. "That necklace is a 1920s heirloom," William said, his voice low but carrying across the room. "It belonged to our grandmother. Hand it over, or I add grand larceny to the list of charges we're filing tonight." Sarah's hand flew to her throat. "Richard gave it to me. It's a gift." "It's stolen property," William corrected. "And judging by the police cruisers pulling up outside, I don't think you want to add theft to your record." Blue and red lights flashed through the front windows, bathing the Christmas tree in a chaotic strobe. Sarah panicked. She scrambled to unclasp the necklace, throwing it onto the table as if it burned her skin. "Fine. Take it. I'm leaving. This family is crazy." "Not so fast," Thomas said, blocking her path. He pulled another document from his file. "We ran a background check while we were driving over. Sarah Miller, or is it Vanessa Tate? Outstanding warrants in Florida for credit card fraud and identity theft. Targeting wealthy suburban husbands seems to be your specialty." Sarah's face went white. The front door opened, and 2 uniformed officers stepped in, guided by one of the Harrison security detail. As they handcuffed Sarah, she started screaming, blaming Richard, claiming he forced her into it. Richard watched in horror as his perfect mistress was dragged away. He turned to Clara, tears streaming down his face, tears of fear, not remorse. "Clara, baby, please. I didn't know. She tricked me. We can fix this. I love you." He tried to reach for her, but Marcus stepped in between them, a solid wall of protective fury. "You weren't tricked into being a racist coward," Marcus said, his voice shaking the floorboards. "You chose that. You chose to cut her hair. You chose to throw her into a blizzard. You don't get to apologize for that." Richard looked at the brothers, then at the guests who were now filming him with their phones, and finally at Clara, who wouldn't even meet his eyes. He realized he was completely alone. As Richard watched his mistress get arrested and realized he had lost his wife, his home, and his status, Thomas handed him an eviction notice. "You have 30 minutes to vacate the premises." 3 months later, the harsh winter snow had melted away, revealing the vibrant purple crocuses blooming in the garden of the Harrison estate. The sprawling lawn, which had once been hidden under a blanket of ice, was now bathed in the golden light of Easter Sunday. Laughter floated on the gentle breeze, a sound far removed from the sobbing that had marked Clara's Christmas Eve. Inside the grand dining room, the table was set with fine china and bouquets of fresh tulips. But unlike Richard's stiff, pretentious parties, this gathering was loud, chaotic, and filled with genuine love. Clara sat at the head of the table, looking radiant. Her hair, now cut into a chic, short style that highlighted her cheekbones, shone with health. But the true light came from the bundle in her arms, her 3-month-old daughter Hope. The baby cooed softly, wrapping a tiny hand around Clara's finger, oblivious to the storm she had survived before she was even born. "More iced tea, Mrs. Higgins?" William asked, leaning over with a pitcher. Seated in the place of honor was Mrs. Higgins, the elderly neighbor who had tried to offer Clara a quilt that dark night. She was no longer the frightened woman cowering behind a fence. Dressed in her Sunday best, she beamed at William, patting his hand. "Oh, you are such a gentleman," she said, her eyes crinkling with joy. "Clara told me you're a doctor? My grandson would love to meet you." Miles away, in a cramped motel room that smelled of stale cigarettes and regret, Richard sat on a lumpy mattress. He wore a stained work shirt, his uniform for the warehouse job he had managed to scrape together after every reputable firm in the state blacklisted him. He stared at his phone, scrolling through social media. He saw a photo Clara's brother had posted. Clara, laughing, surrounded by powerful people who adored her, holding the baby Richard would never meet. He went to type a comment, a plea, anything, but the screen simply flashed. User blocked. He tossed the phone aside, burying his face in his hands, finally understanding that some doors, once closed, never open again. Back at the estate, Marcus stood up, tapping his spoon against his glass. The room quieted down, faces turning toward the patriarch of the family. "To family," Marcus said, raising his glass, his eyes misty as they rested on Clara and baby Hope. "To the ones we're born with, and the ones we choose. We learned a hard lesson this winter. We learned that cruelty can wear a tuxedo, and kindness can come from a stranger across a fence." He nodded to Mrs. Higgins. "And we learned that you never, ever judge a book by its cover." "Hear, hear." This table cheered. Clara looked down at Hope, who was now fast asleep. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The fear, the shame, the desperate need to fit into a world that didn't want her, it was all gone. She was surrounded by kings who protected her, not because of what she looked like, but because of who she was. Clara smiled at her daughter, her heart finally whole again. "We are safe now, little one. Family isn't just who you marry. It's who catches you when you fall."